Welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Mitch J, and I'm here with Slattery, Chandler Klebs, Michael Walsh, and who else is here? Did I miss anybody? Jamie Soden is here, I think. And today we're going to talk about reality. We're going to talk about what's fair during the course of rational conversation. So, Mike, would you start off this conversation, please?
Well, what's fair? Wow, that's a big question. Um, I mean, going back to what we were talking about before, you mentioned Occam's razor, and we all agree that I think Occam's razor is a useful tool, at least some of the time. Where some of us might disagree is whether it's a logical principle that applies to all situations. Now, my view would be that it is a useful tool generally to use in most situations, but there may be some violations of it, such that you can't use it as a way of always getting to the truth. And you were mentioning before how the universe seems to work totally without the assumption of free will. But the most common pushback you're going to get from that is that that's not really the case, because if we're just atoms obeying the laws of physics, atoms aren't rational, chemical processes aren't rational. How does rationality emerge from simple chemical reactions of physical matter following the laws of physics? And so some people might say the universe doesn't work under the assumption of no free will. You do kind of have to include free will, at least as an assumption, to explain human rationality. And all of us here are going to disagree with that, but the way we might disagree with that might be a little bit different. And so, my view would be that chemicals, although chemicals themselves are not rational, when you have trillions of interacting chemicals in the form of an evolved human brain or mammalian brain or any kind of brain that is the result of 3.8 billion years of evolution, rationality kind of emerges at some point through a process of the living organism be needing having it required to react to its environment rationally, because if it didn't, it wouldn't survive. If I see someone walk off a cliff and flap their wings and fall to their death, I need to be able to learn from that to know that if I do the same thing, I'm going to die. So there has to be something in my brain that allows me to rationally respond to my environment, and it does get reduced to something that is chemical and physical, that in and of itself is not rational, but the rationality emerges at a macroscopic level. And
Yes.
that is a fairly open question, and I'm not sure exactly how that works. And scientists are kind of, I think, they don't have the full explanation yet. But somehow, non-rational things, when they're in a complexly arranged things, rationality emerges at a macroscopic way later on, and at large scales. So, what do you guys think of that?
Well, so just to recenter this conversation back on free will for any listeners, um, the reason we're talking about these topics today is because when we engage in conversations with free will believers or people who are exhibiting irrational behavior, the burden we put on them is to conform to reality. We say you're cheating. You're not talking about the way things actually are or the means by which you're having your argument is unfair. You're betraying the rules of logic. So, Mike, in particular, right now, just to get back up to speed, we're talking about how consciousness, well, not consciousness, but how rationality arises from purely physical things and physical processes. Is that right? Is that a fair?
Yeah, but it
fair
definitely relates to Occam's razor, because the free will believer will say Occam's razor here doesn't apply, because you do have to assume free will in order for us to make rational sense of human behavior.
Yes. Okay. So this is where I would disagree, right? I would say that the normal way, the normal way to view reality is the mechanistic way. So we know, for example, um, how we don't claim that plants have free will. We don't claim that a clock that was manufactured by human beings has free will. We see the way it works, all its processes, as being completely mechanistic. But you're saying, well, rationality is this special trait that human beings have. It's what these inanimate objects or these entities that are not conscious do not possess. So maybe that's what it is, right? The fact that free will, there's room for free will. That's what the free will believer would argue. There's room for what gives room to free will, what separates human beings and possibly animals from the inanimate, is that ability to rationalize. That's part of it. Is that a better way to put that?
Yeah, yeah,
So,
definitely. Rationality depends on free will, according to the free will believer.
I think it kind of gets into the discussion on mental causation, whether our mental attributes um, direct the flow of atoms, basically. So there's reductionism, which basically is saying everything can be reduced down to the atomic structure. But I take a different position on that. I say that things are bottom up and top down. So in other words, um, small scale small scale particles create large scale properties, and I think consciousness is one of those large scale properties that play into the very small scale interactions that happen. So I think it's all a causal process, and if it's all a causal process, including our conscious rational thinking and things like that, then that is equally as constrained as those atomic particles are.
I agree with Trick. For me, it's, sometimes when we talk about free will, we talk about it as being incoherent. Other times we talk about it as an illusion. I am also of the opinion that what really exists, at least on a smaller scale, um, are the little bits that make up the bigger parts, and everything is a result of those smaller things. So consciousness for me is an illusion, not in the sense that it's not a concrete idea, but in that it's not what we really think it is. It's something that we feel. We feel as if we're aware. We feel as if we're in control. We feel as if we're alive, as if we're a singular being, when in actuality, we are not. So rationality isn't something that I hold to be dear or something very special to me. To me, it's just the way things are. It's uh, the logical byproduct of having a complex brain.
Yeah, I like to think of consciousness as a property. So if we take a ball, for example, that has a property of roundness, and that roundness allows the particles to roll down a hill, basically. And if those same particles were in the form of a cube, it wouldn't roll down the hill the same way as a ball. So it's the properties, the large scale properties, that allow for the interaction to take place. And I look at consciousness as sort of like that, like a property that has causal influence just as much as roundness of a ball, for example. Even though, roundness is something more measurable than consciousness, because consciousness is more of a subjective thing that happens.
Wait, did you say consciousness has causal influence?
Yes, mental causation, correct. Kind of like
Are you,
roundness of a ball. So I consider consciousness as a property of those small scale structures playing out, basically.
that sounds a lot like property dualism.
No, it's not dualism. It's actually monism, because the property is that structure. So just like roundness and the ball aren't separate. There's no dualism. It's all monism. Same thing with consciousness and the neurons in your brain, basically.
So you're saying that the so if the consciousness is reduced to neurons in the brain. Is that correct?
It's not reduced. The neurons in their brains I'm sorry, the consciousness is a property of the neurons in the brain, just like roundness is a property of the atoms that make up a ball. So it's
Okay.
it's it's the a large scale property that plays back causally into it's like a feedback loop. It plays back causally
It
into
seems like it
our
needs a
Go ahead.
It seems like it needs a little bit more than that, because what if you were to cut out the neuron from the brain and put it on a petri dish? You wouldn't say that that neuron is conscious now, right?
Yeah, but if you took an atom from a ball, you wouldn't say that atom is round. Like you wouldn't say it was the roundness of the ball. It's the entire configuration of all the atoms that make up that ball. Likewise, it's all the atoms that make up the neurons and so far, and the structure that plays out through time. Like same thing with rolling, for example. You wouldn't say that rolling occurs when you take an atom out of the ball and put it on the ground. But if the atom is in the ball, then rolling is occurring. Same thing with consciousness. So it's a part of the play out. It's a physical manifestation that requires this large scale property of roundness, for example, or the mental capabilities.
All right. So it sounds like at some point the complexity of the entire structure gives rise to like an emergent property of consciousness.
Exactly, and that emergent property is just as causal. In other words, it plays just the same. It's the same causal role as say the roundness of a ball plays. It's a causal thing that has to come out due to the other causes that create the structure.
I think this is a good opportunity to segue into different perspectives on reality.
Okay.
Are you guys of the opinion that if one is to reject free will, that one must also reject the supernatural entirely? Is it necessary to be that grounded in reality
No.
in order to investigate, to honestly investigate the issue of free will?
There's a couple of different relationships between God and free will. I mean, you could have on one point, God doesn't have free will and humans don't. God has free will and humans don't. God has free will and humans have free will. So there's several possibilities that could be true. If you reject God because of free will, then you're saying that all three of those possibilities are logically incoherent.
Yeah, I think the only way to say that free will happens on say like a supernatural plane or something like that is to reject logic altogether. Um, because I think the whole thing is based on a logical construct that causality or acausality, either way we go here, applies logically on any event, whether it's a supernatural event or a natural event. So you can't have a logical construct without one of those two concepts. So you'd have to kind of reject logic altogether if we were going to say, oh, free will happens on a supernatural level, for example.
Well, that's an interesting point. If libertarian free will existed, would that be supernatural?
Uh,
Libertarian free will basically says that free will happens because of indeterminism, but we as incompatibilists say that indeterminism doesn't help because it's not up to a will or
Well,
any
no. Well,
non-caused events.
what it would say is that consciousness is the deciding factor, and it's completely free of any physical determined constraints, or
why is
any physical strength
conscious?
at all.
Sorry, why is consciousness so special? Why you seem to be? I don't know if you're playing devil's advocate or if you think the argument is a little bit difficult to attack, even though you disagree with it. Perhaps the second, the latter,
Well,
is more like your
I
position.
think when we use the term will, we kind of assume consciousness, don't you, Mitch?
Yes, but to me, consciousness is not very mysterious. Neither is rationality. As we
Oh,
just
right.
discussed a few minutes ago, it's about to me, it's evolution, right? We developed in a way, in a particular way, because we needed to adapt to the situations that we had. And this consciousness is an illusion. And when I say an illusion, I mean because the reality of what's happening, at least on a more microscopic level, is very different from what we really think is happening.
Yeah,
Which
I
is
mean,
one of
I wouldn't use the term illusion because consciousness is illusion is kind of a contradiction in terms, in my opinion. Um, but I think what
for
Michael
lack of a
is,
better word.
yeah, for the lack of a better word. But I think what Michael is saying is that when people conceptualize free will, they're saying that it has to do with consciousness, and I kind of agree with them on that. That if something is outside of your consciousness, it can't be free nor can it be willed. Is that what you're saying, Michael? I'm not sure.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, the traditional, I guess maybe naive or incorrect or whatever, concept of libertarian free will is that my consciousness is the ghost in the machine, and my body, it's like, the driver in the car, and my mind is making the decisions, and the atoms in my brain and in my body follow the commands of my consciousness that somehow controls them, and my consciousness is free of any physical factors that may control it or determine it.
And that's just false. So
Yeah.
Right.
that is
Of
Well,
just
course.
but the question is, should that exist? Would that be classified as supernatural?
well, I don't believe in anything supernatural. So if something is understood, it becomes part of the natural world. If something is not understood, then it's not understood, and we're just assuming it doesn't exist. Once we have enough evidence and understanding to say it exists, it becomes natural. So I don't think any kind of phenomena could ever
Yeah.
give meaning to the
Well,
word
technically you're right,
supernatural.
but I think if people, when people think of like a soul or something like that uh, existing, then they're kind of saying it's supernatural. Though if we scientifically concluded that, you're right. We would say, oh, souls are just part of the natural world. So
Yeah, they'd be natural. We'd study
right,
souls. We'd get signals,
exactly,
frequencies from souls. There'd be devices to detect souls. Have a
right.
theory of souls in
But
modern physics.
yeah, I think what
Yeah,
we're talking about is when we say natural is what we've concluded is natural, like atoms, for example, are natural.
right.
Everything that after the Big Bang is natural, and there's these other things such as souls. For the just for practical purposes, we could say they're supernatural, but
This opens up a big debate over the definition of natural and supernatural. Because if we somehow got empirical evidence that God exists, then God would be natural, I guess, in that under this line of reasoning. And so then it would be kind of ridiculous to call God supernatural in the same breath, or
right.
consider God to be supernatural, because anything we discover empirically and can measure in any sense of any sense of that term would somehow automatically fall into the domain of natural.
Hey, Chandler, you keep getting cut off a little bit. What, you were trying to say something?
Yeah, I mean, you guys are talking about so much, and there's so much I wanted to say. But basically, yeah, this whole natural versus supernatural thing has to be very clearly defined, as well as what's rational or irrational. Because I think what's happening is we're throwing out these terms about free will and rationality and consciousness and natural and supernatural, but we're not really defining our terms, and we're just assuming that people know what we mean.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, my stance is that there is no meaningful way to say supernatural. It's just illogical. Because if we understand something, it's natural.
It's sort of like, the foods that are labeled as all natural. And I'm like, well, what do you mean it all comes from nature?
Yeah.
Well, what if there was a ghost that could appear and affect the physical world in a way that science could never explain, and just appear randomly, and there could be no physical law that could describe it or anything. Like, it would totally violate all the existing laws of physics. Would that be
It's called a
supernatural?
quark. It's called a
Yeah.
quark.
Well, it would have to be accounted for in our physics. So if scientifically we found this specific ghost, then yeah, we would account for it in our physics, and it would then become natural. But
Well, let's
so
say you couldn't.
it's
Let's
very
say you couldn't.
confusing.
But
What do you
let's say
mean?
you couldn't. Let's say scientists could simply never account for it because it doesn't behave according to any kind of regularity.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing with quantum physics. There's a lot of stuff we can't account for in quantum physics, yet we still say that it's part of physics. Just something being strange or outside of what we can know doesn't mean that it's not natural. I guess not. It's something outside of what is natural.
So I guess you guys think that the supernatural is just impossible.
In that scientific context, it kind of is, but in the just way people talk about things,
Yeah.
commonly, we can use supernatural.
The kind of phenomena that we would call supernatural, I'm not saying that's impossible. I'm saying if we had enough evidence and understanding of it, clearly it would it be meaningful to call it supernatural. So it's just that's the kind of point I'm trying to make. It just doesn't really make any sense to
Yeah,
ever
but
call anything supernatural.
some people actually define the supernatural as that which we have not scientifically accounted for yet. Meaning, once it is, it becomes natural, but until then, it's supernatural.
So the word I would use for that is false. So that would,
Yeah,
that
I
would
wouldn't
be
say accounted
that would
for. I
be
would say evidence for. So
right.
so if there's evidence for something, then it's considered natural. If there's no evidence for it, then We just don't account for it. But
That's very relevant to the discussion. That's very good. That does relate back to the free will thing. So it's um another thing is when we oppose this belief in free will, when we oppose the idea of free will, we often say it's an a priori kind of argument. That is an argument that's just purely logical. It doesn't require physical evidence, like the kind of a proof you would do in mathematics or in logic, mathematical logic.
right, it's
We are, yeah. Mhm.
deductive rather than
Yeah, just simple deductive reasoning. Like
right.
sometimes hard determinism is described as this. Um, Determinism is true, therefore free will is false. If you want to use some predicate logic or whatever. So we are saying that rationality is the most important. I think Trick has really emphasized this before, like in the past, and I certainly agree with him on that. That rationality is the most important thing. So given that we're saying rationality is the most important thing, what are the consequences of that? Like what else do we demand? Yeah.
I think we need to talk about what is rationality.
Well, when we say rationality, I think we're using it in basically the construct of critical thinking, which is the use of logic. For example, induction, deduction, abduction, falsification. So it's all these methodologies that we have to determine the likelihood of a fact, basically. So, and then that's when people use this critical thinking, they're basically being rational. Rationality just means that we're using the methodologies of logic, I would say. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Well, it's very interesting because all the time this happens where you're saying or doing something somebody doesn't like and they say that you're being irrational. So I'm kind of wondering what exactly they mean when they say that you're not rational and that they say they're being rational, because it seems like it's a word that people throw around.
Yeah. Well, let's say somebody's saying something based purely on emotion. They're mad or something, and they're saying something just based on that emotion alone. We would say that's irrational because they're not using any consistent or reliable logical methodology, basically.
Right. So basically, what we're saying for something to be rational is there needs to be a reason behind it, some kind of thought process, some logic behind it. It's not that you just do something or believe something because you feel like it.
Right. Like an intuition might be considered irrational because it's just an intuition, but an intuition that combined with a logical reason is a different thing altogether because you have something to back up that intuition.
That's interesting because, I was reading the Free Will and Determinism book by Clifford Williams I ordered recently. And, Frederick, the free willist, in that conversation, that book, was saying that, like, our intuition proves free will, that it's intuitive or something. And, I've seen people throw that word around that, oh, well, I believe in free will because it's intuitive. Our intuition tells us that we're in control. And I don't think I have intuition because I don't
Yeah.
have a clue what they're talking about.
Well, intuitions aren't necessarily a bad thing. For example, if everybody has the same intuition, people might accept those specific intuitions axiomatically and start their logical reasoning from that intuition. But when people start disagreeing with that intuition, when one person says, "No, no, I don't have that same intuition," that's when you kind of really have to back up that intuition with logical reasoning.
Yeah, well, maybe I need to look up intuition in my Word Web dictionary here. Because this is a word that it gets thrown around so much. Let's see. Intuition. One is instinctive knowing without the use of rational processes. And
Yes, it even says it right there. No rational process.
yeah, and two is an impression that something might be the case. And then the synonyms are hunch or suspicion.
Yeah. So it's like feeling. Someone has a
It's a gut.
feeling.
It's like a gut feeling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
that's weird
I
because
think I just got cut off for a second.
Oh,
So I did want to make a comment about intuition. Science is the enemy of intuition. When you study science or math and mathematics, quite often when you're approached with a new area of science, a new area of mathematics, a new subfield, and you're presented with this information, whether in a textbook or by a teacher,
Mhm.
you are a certain question. You are confronted with certain ideas, and it turns out your intuition is wrong. It turns out zero is a real number. It turns out meaningful. It turns out that we are made of little things that we can't see. So I agree. Intuition is helpful for uh, human civilization in terms of it gives us a good starting point. It gives us a starting point for investigation. But that's about it. I mean, once you get past that, you really have to use the scientific method and the
Well,
faculties
here's the
of
thing,
reason.
though. Here's the thing, though. In our everyday social interactions, sometimes you kind of have to go by intuition because you're not always going to have the ability to perform a scientific investigation on something. Like if I, for example, think my friend is lying to me, I can't perform a scientific investigation to weigh evidence and this and that and to know for sure. I kind of have to say, I think he's lying. I'm going to go with it for now until I get evidence that contradicts that.
Why would you think he's lying though?
I may just have a hunch. It may just be the way he's saying it
Right.
or
Well, that would be, I think, I would consider that an irrational uh, belief. If you don't have anything to go on uh, for evidence-wise regarding why he was lying, then I would think you're just okay. You're believing something because you have some gut feeling, and that's the difference, I think, between rational and irrational.
Yeah, I think you would have some evidence there. I believe that you do have some evidence. That's why you have that feeling.
yeah.
Right. Because when we believe something, when we feel that something is a certain way, there's some reason, some evidence that's led us to even think that in the first place. And that's why I'm saying there's no such thing as like true intuition, because that would imply that it happens for no reason.
Oh,
Well,
interesting.
intuition is a lot of times wrong too. Like for the intuition of free will, that is a huge intuition. People think they have free will because they don't see all the variables, and intuitively it feels like we're able to choose multiple options, and then all those options are actually real possibilities. So intuitively, yeah, it seems like free will exists, but that's why when we just start disagreeing with people, they need to back up that position, that intuitive position with actual evidence, because we're saying no, it's illogical, and once we say it's illogical and we explain why it's illogical, then they kind of have a problem with their intuition.
Well, here's an example that might apply. Now, for example, people refer to the sun rising and setting as if the sun is moving rather than the earth spinning. So like what? So to somebody, it might look as if the sun is the flaming ball in the sky that's moving from one end of the sky to the other. Would that be an example of something? It's an intuition because it looks that way, so they believe that, and until the later evidence shows them that's not what's happening.
Well, that's exactly what happened, like in the past with geo people thinking that the solar system was geocentric. Everything was
Yeah.
revolving around the Earth, right? So we actually believed that until we discovered that that intuition was incorrect, and it was heliocentric for the solar system. So
Yeah, so now when you have evidence and experiments and stuff that do back up a certain belief, then it's no longer intuition, is it? Because you're going based on all the reasons why you know it to be true.
well, right, and then that's the case where okay, people now understand the reality of the solar system and how things actually do orbit. So and this is just facts now. I mean, this is learned in school, and people can see it. There's video and everything, so it's undeniable. So they don't even go with their intuition on it, and actually their intuition kind of dissipates because it's gets replaced with this new understanding, basically. And that's what I think needs to happen with free will.
Yeah, so as people they learn about the causes that compel their behavior to be the way it is, then they will no longer have, I guess, this feeling that some of them have that they really could have done otherwise.
So we demand rationality from everyone. But we know why free will is important. George often, and when I say George, I mean George Ortega, one of the guys who started this whole movement to investigate free will. He often quotes Searle uh, in order to illustrate how important of an issue free will is. So we know it's a big, important issue to investigate this and to analyze the consequences of free will belief and the rejection of free will belief. But we're saying more than that when we investigate free will. We're saying we demand from all humankind a certain level of rationality and a certain minimum understanding about the real world that we live in. And if people, are up for that cause, if people agree to that, if they agree to be rational and agree to be honest, at least intellectually honest, then a rejection of free will seems like a natural conclusion after investigating the issue. But are there any other things that we demand of people who are investigating the issue of free will? Are there any necessary conclusions that one has to come to? For example, about religion, rejecting religion, or which religions are compatible with this idea of free will belief, besides the Calvinists, as we've talked about earlier?
Well, this is very interesting because as far as I know of, I don't know of any religion that is actually compatible with the no free will understanding. Because even though, for example, there tends to be fatalism in some religions, there's an idea of fate or destiny. It seems as if there's still the idea that you are rewarded or punished either in this life or the next according to a belief system, and it's your fault or your credit what happens. So it seems like free will is the building block of the other of all the world religions that I know of anyway.
One thing that it seems that people have to give up is moral responsibility. It would seem to me that would be another thing.
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that?
Well, moral responsibility is usually described under the assumption of libertarian free will. Take away libertarian free will, and you don't have any kind of notion of moral responsibility that would, I guess, make any sense. Now you can have a compatibilistic kind of moral responsibility, which is a kind of weaker form of moral responsibility. It's maybe something a little bit stronger than mere legal responsibility, but that seems to be once someone rejects libertarian free will, it seems to be that their notion of moral responsibility either has to go away completely or has to be degraded to some weaker notion of it.
I agree. I mean, as we've said many times, I think we've used the terminology fundamental versus practical responsibility in previous discussions. So yeah, there's no fundamental responsibility makes no sense because free will is bogus, but there's still this issue of practical responsibility. You still have to detain the people who are demonstrating dangerous behavior. And how you treat them afterward, that's what will probably change after having rejected this notion of free will. So is that all we can say? We can say that we demand that people are rational and intellectually honest, and after they investigate free will, there'll still be a measure of responsibility, but it'll be more of practical responsibility. But we can't make any claims about religion. Is that?
Um,
Oh no,
I,
no.
I think we can at least falsify some religions. I'm not sure about religion in general, the big picture. And it seems to me that you kind of also have to come to some kind of materialism if you reject free will, because there's no non-physical causal thing in the universe at all. It would seem to me.
Well, I think that although I'm a materialist, I tend to think that there's no way that you can escape causality or even a causality being incompatible with free will, no matter how much immaterial supernatural stuff you try to throw in there.
And we also have to understand that most religions don't have the evidential foundation that other things have. So when we're talking about rationality, we're saying we demand some kind of evidence for a strong belief, such as a belief in some kind of religion. So same thing with free will. So it's the same problem. If people don't have evidence for their belief, we're saying that they really shouldn't believe it unless there's a little stronger evidence.
Wait, how do you guys define religion?
Oh boy.
Well, you know, it's kind of an interesting thing. Like, of course, I've gone by my Word Web dictionary. Like, I'll pull that up again here because I tend to use it in things like one is a strong belief in a supernatural power or powers that control human destiny, or two, an institution to express belief in a divine power. So it tends to mean either some belief in that there's some supernatural power that control our destiny, or it's the name of an institution, some kind of group of people come together to worship whatever divine power this is.
Yeah, it's usually that one. It's usually some kind of group like Christianity, obviously, or Islam. Uh, whereas theism is different. That's just a belief in God. Someone could be a theist but not be religious in any way.
Yeah, you could say that deism is I guess you could try to say it's compatible with a lack of free will, because it's not like the God of Christianity that that send gives you rewards or punishments in the afterlife based on your choice and puts the blame on you, which requires free will. So I don't I actually think what people misunderstand about non-religious people and even atheists in general is that it not isn't really about the existence of God, at least from my perspective. I mean, you guys could totally disagree with this. It's not about the existence of God. It's about the idea that we are somehow morally responsible to do whatever this God commands to do, and if we don't, we fry forever. That's what my issue with religion is. I don't really care whether people believe that there's a creator that much, you know.
Would
Yeah,
would sorry, go ahead.
sorry, I was good. Well, my issue isn't exact. My issue with religion is that it promotes irrational behavior and dogmatic thinking and a rejection of the fundamental principles that we need to have rational discourse. That's the problem. I agree in the sense that it's not the fact that you're mentioning some mysterious entity that I'm not aware of. I'm okay with that. My point is once it's time to have a sensible conversation, now you're using circular logic and making a lot of claims that are not based on evidence. Another thing I wanted to point out just really quickly was that some words are easier to describe than to define. Sometimes it's easier to describe what something is than to define it. Like a lot of time when theists are being critical of atheism, they will remark about certain dogmatic communist countries in the past where religion was banned and say, oh, atheism is just like religion. But, I say that atheism is a religion, but I would say, well, in those kinds of situations, those atheist nations were acting like religions. So, in other words, it's easier to describe the elements of religious thought and religious institutions and religious behavior than it is to really define what religion is. And I think one of the key elements is this sort of evasiveness when it comes to rational discourse.
Yeah, well, I think that's a part of the key of religion is they don't require uh, rational discourse; they just require faith. So when it comes to that, then they're basically saying, oh, well, we have faith of this, or we have faith of this political movement that you're talking about. So that to me is associated to religion is this idea that you can have faith about something without applying any rational critical thinking to it.
Yeah, it sounds to me like faith is really believing something without a reason. That's kind of what it sounds like to me.
Or without sufficient evidence, as Sam Harris has said in the past.
Wait, how do you define sufficient evidence?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously that's hard to define, but
Yeah.
assuming we reasonably can figure out what sufficient evidence should be, And what
I
did Carl
think
Sagan say? Yeah.
there was one guy named Jerry Coyne. Are you guys familiar with Jerry Coyne?
Oh,
Yeah, of
He's a
course. Of course.
very well-known biologist, and he's also a determinist. And he defines faith as the belief in something without sufficient evidence such that it would fail to convince the rational person.
Oh, that's a good one. I like it. Not bad.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But Mike, I think you were in the middle of something, and I kind of cut you off. Sorry. So, do you remember what you were?
Oh, I was just gonna ask, given our the question of what is a religion, do you guys think deism and pantheism could be qualified as religions?
Well, I'm not entirely sure because deism tends to think, oh yeah, there was or is a God that created things but doesn't do anything, and so that has a tendency to believe in a deity that's not controlling events and doesn't necessarily involve worship, I guess. But as far as pantheism goes, I'm not so sure. And of course, if George were here with us this week, I know he would have a lot to say on this.
Just just so you have my opinion on it, I don't think they do. As a matter of fact, I don't think theism, like I said, qualifies as a religion. So deism, theism, and pantheism are just a position on whether you believe in some type of God or not. The religion comes from having some kind of scripture or some kind of ideologies that are a little more detailed than something exists or something doesn't exist.
I think you're
Well,
right, Trick.
but then hold on, then I guess communism could be a religion, right?
Communism is a political movement, so no, it's not. It's not. Communism. I mean, religions have like gods in them and stuff like that. That and they usually have qualifiers for those gods and things like that, and they usually have some kind of supernatural claims to them, which I don't think communism does. So no, it's a
Okay, so
different
a
thing.
qualifier for religion is that something supernatural has to be it has to be in it.
Oh, I think so. I think there's got to be some kind of
Well, okay. So I'm going to disagree here. Like I said, I
okay.
think religion is the kind of thing where you can't really define it. You can just describe it, and it has certain attributes. Let's say typical religions have 7 attributes. Let's say they have 7 attributes.
Okay.
If some ideology exhibits 6 of those 7 attributes, I think it's fair to say it's a religion or it's a lot like religion. Whereas, so like I said before, dogmatic atheism is like a religion. Fascism, when you have a
Yeah,
cult of
you could definitely say
personality, like a
like
religion.
a religion, and that makes sense. You could say this is religion like in that it's dogmatic. Dogmatism you can kind of associate.
Dogmatism is just one part of it, right? There's the iconography. So like I said, it's a celebration of a cult of personality, which is really that's not anything to do with dogma per se, but that's another
Right.
aspect that I would say, this is basically a religion. This is a religion. Kim Jong Un is
Yeah.
is God, and they don't outspokenly say it's a religion, but I mean, if that's not a religion, nothing. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah,
clearly,
that one's probably more religion like than most.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah, it's a state religion.
Well,
State religion.
guys, here's what I think because it seems that all the well-known religions of the world, they're not just abstract belief about the existence of something like Trick said. It's about there's an actual rule book. There's some kind of system which our people are demanded to live by.
Yeah.
Which I think in that sort of a way, sure, you could compare religion to political philosophies or just any ethical philosophy about a way of life, a way you do something. that's, of course, that's a very, very broad definition of religion, but it does seem to fit many of the so-called religions, that there's a way you have to live, because if you don't, the man in the sky will get angry, or the dictator will get angry, or your parents will get angry, or the unicorn or the spaghetti monster will get angry at you and punish you, so that's what it's all based on: authority, divine command theory, that
Oh,
because there's some authority figure that says you have to live this way, you have to live that way.
Though
okay, so
not all of them, like Buddha, certain types of Buddhism
right.
don't have gods or anything like that. So yeah, it's confusing, but they usually believe some kind of in some kind of spiritual aspects and things like that. So
But yeah, where you're going with that trick, that's exactly, I was about to go in that direction idea. So here's it. So I posed some questions that were kind of difficult. How about an easier one? Which views on reality, or which religion or religious like ideas or ideologies, whether they be dogmatic or not so dogmatic, are the most compatible, as opposed to which ones were? So we know like atheism seems to be like a natural sort of direction that hard determinists or hard incompatibilists take. In fact, you most likely you probably thought about religion before you thought about free will. I'm not sure how true that. I know it was true for me. I know it's true
Yeah,
for
that's true
the
for me
rest.
too.
Yeah.
so are
So
most compatible with what is the? I'm not sure the question
with
actually.
the reject, so if someone rejects this notion of free will, um, what's really compatible with someone who is being intellectually honest and rational? So we said atheism is compatible. Pantheism, we sort of mentioned in passing. That seems to work too, right? Like, what worldviews are
Mm,
there?
well, materialism would be compatible with that.
Hmm.
Most atheists are materialists, but yeah.
True.
Because George is often concerned with the spirituality that humans seem to crave. And there's a lot of evidence, I think, to suggest that, at least in the past, that's been a big part of the human experience. So a lot of times he's not just trying to convince people about the true deterministic nature of reality, but to console them and comfort them and offer them something
Mhm.
after they have investigated the issue and reached this conclusion. So, what could we offer people who are starting to become hard determinists or hard incompatibilists? What can we offer them? Is it just, yeah, the world is sticks and stones and rocks, and it's either atheism or pantheism? That's it.
We can kind of offer them the fact that the more rational we are, the more humanity will progress. At least I would think that the more we have access to uh, true or close to true information, the more information we have to go on to make the world a better place. So when we start making up things just because we like to make up the things, we're kind of basing our structure, our entire human structure on falsehoods. So I think consequentially, just knowing the truth is a better gives a better outcome for humanity in general.
I'm sure Chandler would agree with you very strongly on that issue.
Yeah.
So,
And I do think that we have this issue that when somebody gives up belief in free will, it does indeed imply a series of life changes and changes in behavior that flow from that automatically. Because you start realizing you can't blame yourself, you can't blame other people. Um, and I do think that that could, like, for example, our co-host Felicia Hogan, she saw that free will was false first, and then from that, her Christianity that she was taught, unraveled, and it just no longer made sense. So that's gonna happen with some people. So yeah, we do need to work on, well, what can we offer them that helps them through that difficult time of change?
It also depends a lot on what you desire, because it seems to me that you have to instill a desire for truth and
yes.
knowledge based on a rational, evidence-based
Yep.
pursuit. Because if your whole mentality is I want to believe whatever makes me happy, determinism is not going to offer you anything, really. It's just going to crush all of your beliefs and probably make you very sad. So we have to, like a lot of atheists always say that, well, when I raise my kids, I'm not going to teach them what to think, I'm going to teach them how to think. And that means that epistemologically, I'm going to teach them to value evidence and rationally based thinking. And that seems to be a prerequisite, because if you value evidence and rationally based thinking, then you'll care about the truth based on that way of thinking. And if determinism offers you that truth, that will be something that satisfies that person.
Well, what's interesting about it is it sounds as if it's about whether we have a desire for truth that supersedes our desire to feel happy.
That's the way I am. I care about the truth based on reason, logic, and evidence. And so whatever that leads to is what satisfies me.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thought because, like for example, George, he's very much that happiness is what it's all about. But then you have to really question, is that what it's all about, or is truth sometimes more important?
Yeah, so I agree. I think we've reached a pretty good conclusion here. It seems that the most important thing, as Mike said very eloquently, is that people have to appreciate logic and evidence. People have to be reasonable. They have to be rational. How do we know this? Well, we've discovered it over time. We've discovered why this is important, and we could give tons and tons of reasons about why this is the foundation for um, for how humans have to view the world, think about the world, and interact with the world. Furthermore, there has to be we have to be grounded in reality. And there might be a little bit of wiggle room for what sort of perspective you have on reality, but there might not be as much as people think there is. But that doesn't mean that they need to be fatalistic. It doesn't mean you can't give meaning to your life. Even if there is no true meaning in life, you can give your life meaning. You can make your life meaningful.
And the other thing that we kind of discussed in the very beginning is how rationality could come about, which I think we all agree that the evolutionary process can lead to consciousness that can build rational models, basically. And that's not something that is outside of causality uh, or requires free will in any way.
Wait, I don't think Jamie has said it, chimed in yet. Do you want to chime in, Jamie?
Sorry, I was a bit distracted. Can you remind me what we're talking about?
What does accepting that there is no free will have to offer humanity?
Well, it offers positive changes, doesn't it? Well, I don't know what to say really.
All
So yeah, it offers positive change. He's right. um, and we can we can become rational through natural processes. So we've kind of concluded that, and yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow, looks like we figured everything out, huh? So,
Let's just
solved.
transcribe that, put it into a book, and sell it.
There you go, everybody.
Yeah, yeah, we talked about a lot, and I mean, there were so many terms we threw out. We talked about so many different topics in this one episode, but it was really good, guys. Of course, it never ends, but I do think, yeah, we will focus more in the future on about, what it implies for people after they've accepted that free will is an illusion, and how their changes in their life flow from that, and how they don't have to end up fatalistic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And that's
agree.
another topic we probably want to discuss at a different
But
time. Is
but
the
also
equation. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead,
let's
Michael.
also not kid ourselves that this is going to be easy. This is going to be a monumental challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's an uphill battle. There's
The
no.
the really ironic thing is that when someone has irrational beliefs, the only way they can defend those beliefs is through logic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Logic is the only means by which we can, um, intellectually express what we believe in and defend those stances. So it's really strange when people slip in and out of the rules of logic.
I think Christians kind of there's a lot of Christians that kind of understand that, and that's why they've built this apologetics type thing, where they have these preconceived ideas that they
Presuppositional
presuppositional.
mumbo
That's the word I
jumbo.
was thinking of. So they presuppose God, and then they base their logic on that. um, so they try to they try to use logic or at least to some degree, but then at the very beginning they kind of fail in that aspect.
Or
Well,
they or in the middle they fail. I'm sorry.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think part of the reason that they had to develop apologetics is because they knew their beliefs didn't make sense, and so they had to invent a way to make them make sense.
Right.
Yeah, I think the presuppositionalism it comes, I think, from Calvin. Calvin thought that without God, we're just basically total idiots who can't think for ourselves, and that only by presupposing God can we even justify any kind of rationality whatsoever. So you can thank John Calvin for that.
Well, you know what? We might still be complete idiots who can't think for ourselves, but that doesn't mean God exists. It doesn't mean that idiots can presuppose something and no longer be idiots after that.
Well,
Yeah,
no
but
one said Calvin was rational.
Well, of course.
yeah, but Mitch is absolutely right. When people start making a claim or something like that, and then what they'll do is they'll start using some reasoning and some logic, but then all of a sudden when they get cornered, they'll say, well, this is something outside of logic and reason, and that kind of puts an end to a discussion basically.
Yeah,
So
going back to what I was said before, the scary thing though is that a lot of people are perfectly fine with having beliefs that are illogical and that maybe are causing cognitive dissonance in their mind, and they're totally okay with it. Like my mom, for example, she's a young Earth creationist. She thinks the Earth is somewhere about 10,000 years old. And I asked her, I was like, okay, so if mankind is less than 10,000 years old, how do you explain white people and black people? And she's like, well, they adapted. It's like, well, if how could they have adapted in the past 5,000 years? That would require that evolution work actually faster than even evolutionists say it does work. So isn't your view illogical? And then she basically tells me to shut up.
yeah,
But she's happy believing what she believes, and that's the thing is
well,
you have to get people to value logic and evidence.
I
What?
can't imagine she believes in evolution though. That's the thing.
No,
So
she totally rejects evolution.
of course, yeah,
On,
because
on
you
what
can't.
on what grounds?
Well, that's another way people defend their beliefs. They just tell you to shut up.
She rejects it totally based on her intuition that it doesn't seem possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess we've almost approached an hour. So, Mitch, did you want to close out this episode?
Um, yeah, I don't mind. You guys can just chime in if we forget anything. Okay, so this was Free Will, Science, and Religion with Jamie Soden, Michael Walsh, Trick Slattery, Chandler Klebs, and myself, Mitch J. We talked about how rationality comes first, how people have to value logic and evidence, what reality is at minimum, and what must be accepted for those who investigate free will and are trying to be intellectually honest.
Okay, so is that all?
Yep.
All
Yep.
right.